poor girl was forced to wed a 63-year-old millionaire. On the seventh night, she discovered, "Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. The night air was heavy with silence when Clara stood in front of the towering iron gates of the Whitmore estate. The mansion loomed behind them like a fortress of marble and glass, its windows glowing faintly under the pale moonlight. She had never imagined her life would come to this. A simple girl from a rundown neighborhood, forced into a marriage she never wanted. A marriage to a man old enough to be her grandfather. Her family's debt had cornered her into signing a contract that felt like a sentence, not a vow. Inside, guests whispered, their diamond jewelry glittering beneath chandeliers that sparkled like frozen stars. Every step Clara took across the grand hall echoed with judgment. Their eyes followed her, measuring her worth, labeling her as the poor girl who had sold her youth for a fortune she could never truly touch. She kept her gaze low, gripping the small bouquet in her trembling hands, as if the fragile flowers could protect her from their stares. At the far end of the aisle, Richard Whitmore waited. He was known in business circles as a ruthless millionaire, a man of 63 years whose empire stretched across banks, land, and oil. Tonight, he stood in a tailored suit, his silver hair polished, his expression unreadable. Clara felt her knees weaken at the sight. His age was undeniable, his presence overwhelming. Yet there was something strange in his eyes, a glimmer of calculation, as though he were assessing not just her, but the storm their union would unleash. The priest's voice began the ceremony, each word pressing against Clara's chest like a chain tightening around her heart. She tried to steady her breathing, but the room spun. Flashes of her mother's tear-streaked face haunted her. "We have no choice, Clara," her mother had whispered the night before, handing her the wedding contract. "If you do not agree, they will take the house. They will take everything." Clara had signed with hands shaking, the ink blotting slightly where her tears had fallen. Now, standing before Richard, she realized that signature had sealed not just her future, but her freedom. The words, "for better or worse," felt like a cruel joke. She could not imagine anything better, only worse. When Richard slid the golden band onto her finger, the crowd erupted in applause. But Clara heard only the sound of her own heartbeat, pounding in her ears like a war drum. She wanted to scream, to run, to vanish into the night. Instead, she lifted her chin, forcing herself to meet his gaze. To her surprise, his eyes softened for a brief moment, a fleeting flicker of something human. Compassion? Pity? Or perhaps a secret he was not ready to reveal. As they walked down the aisle together, hand in hand, whispers followed them like shadows. Clara felt the weight of the world pressing on her shoulders. She had become Mrs. Richard Whitmore. But inside she was still Clara, the girl who loved sketching sunsets on scraps of paper, the girl who dreamed of a love that would lift her, not chain her. And yet, somewhere deep in her chest, a question stirred. Was this marriage truly the end of her story? Or the beginning of a truth that would shatter everything she thought she knew? The night after the ceremony, Clara found herself inside a room larger than the entire apartment where she had grown up. The walls were painted ivory, the curtains woven from velvet that shimmered under the dim light. A chandelier glowed above her, its crystals scattering fragments of light across the carpet. Everything was breathtaking, yet every detail felt suffocating, as if wealth itself had become a cage. She sat on the edge of the bed, her wedding gown still clinging to her shoulders, her hands locked tightly together. Outside her window, the garden stretched endlessly, manicured hedges twisting into labyrinths, fountains rising like frozen sculptures. It should have felt like a fairy tale, but to Clara, it felt like exile. Richard had said little after the vows. He escorted her into the mansion, gave a polite nod, and disappeared into his study with a glass of bourbon in hand. The sound of the heavy door closing echoed through the hall, leaving Clara with a silence more deafening than any insult. She wondered if this was how it would be from now on. Two strangers bound by paper, living in the same house but on opposite ends of a chasm. The next morning, Clara walked hesitantly through the endless corridors of the estate. Staff members bowed respectfully, yet their eyes flickered with curiosity, even suspicion. She could almost hear their thoughts. Was she a gold digger? Was she waiting for the old man's fortune? Every polite smile carried a sharp edge, reminding her that she did not belong here. At breakfast, the long dining table looked more like a boardroom than a family space. Plates of eggs, bacon, and toast were laid out neatly, untouched at Richard's side. He sat at the head, reading a newspaper, his silver-rimmed glasses perched on his nose. Without lifting his gaze, he asked, "Did you sleep well?" His voice was calm, distant, the kind of tone one might use with an acquaintance, not a bride. Clara nodded, unsure if he even wanted an answer. She whispered, "Yes, thank you," though her night had been restless. He folded the paper slowly, setting it aside. His eyes studied her, not with desire, but with a strange calculation, as though he were measuring her resolve. "You may go about your days as you wish," he said evenly. "The staff will assist you with anything you need. This house is yours now, in name. But understand this, Clara. Our marriage remains exactly what we agreed upon, a contract, nothing more." His words were like cold water poured over her heart. She lowered her gaze, biting back the sharp retort that burned on her tongue. She wanted to remind him that she had not chosen this union either, that she had been forced into it. But she swallowed her pride, choosing silence. After breakfast, Clara wandered into the library. The shelves soared to the ceiling, filled with leather-bound volumes that smelled of dust and history. She ran her fingers along the spines, feeling both wonder and loneliness. In that moment, she realized the cruel paradox of her new life. She had stepped into unimaginable luxury, yet she had never felt poorer. Later that day, Richard left for meetings downtown. Clara watched from the balcony as the black limousine rolled away. The driveway seemed endless, the iron gates closing behind the car like prison bars. Alone again, she allowed herself to breathe. She picked up her old sketchbook, the one item she had smuggled into the mansion. Its pages were filled with drawings of sunsets, faces, and fleeting dreams. She pressed it to her chest, whispering to herself, "I will not lose who I am." But even as she whispered those words, a shadow of fear lingered. How long could she keep her soul intact inside a life that was never meant for her? And why, despite his icy distance, did Richard's fleeting look of softness last night still haunt her mind? Something about him did not add up. Something told her that behind the mask of the untouchable millionaire, there was a truth waiting to surface. And once that truth revealed itself, her life would never be the same again. Days turned into weeks, and Clara settled into a rhythm inside the Whitmore estate, though settling was not the word she would have chosen. Life in the mansion was a constant performance, each hallway echoing with her own quiet footsteps, each room polished and cold. Yet beneath the surface of silence, something began to shift. One morning, Clara entered the garden with her sketchbook tucked under her arm. The early sun spilled golden light across the fountain, and for the first time since her marriage, she allowed herself a moment of peace. She sat on a stone bench, opened her worn book, and began to sketch the roses that lined the pathway. Drawing had always been her refuge, a way to hold on to herself when the world tried to strip her identity away. She was so absorbed in her sketching that she did not notice Richard standing nearby, watching. When she finally looked up, startled, she saw him leaning against the railing with a curious expression. For a moment, he did not look like the powerful millionaire or the cold husband she had come to know. He looked simply like a man. "You draw," he said, his tone carrying a note of surprise. Clara hesitated, unsure if he was mocking her or genuinely interested. "Yes," she answered softly. "It helps me breathe." He stepped closer, his eyes falling on the sketch of the roses. His gaze lingered, not with criticism but with something unreadable. Something almost gentle. "They are good," he said quietly. "You see details others miss." Clara blinked, uncertain how to respond. She had braced herself for indifference or disdain, not a compliment. For a fleeting instant, their eyes met, and she thought she glimpsed a hidden depth in him, a layer buried beneath the cold exterior. But just as quickly, his expression closed, the mask sliding back into place. He turned away, muttering, "Do not let the staff distract you with gossip. They talk too much." Then he left, leaving Clara more confused than before. That evening, Clara overheard two servants whispering in the corridor. "He never lets anyone into the garden," one of them said. Yet today, he stopped to watch her draw. Their voices dropped lower, but the implication lingered in Clara's mind. Perhaps Richard was not as impenetrable as he appeared. Later that week, Clara ventured into the city with the chauffeur. She wanted to buy art supplies, and though she kept her head down, she still felt the weight of public scrutiny. At a small shop, a woman recognized her and sneered. "You think wearing diamonds makes you one of us?" the woman spat. "You are still the poor girl who sold herself." Clara's cheeks burned, her hands trembling as she clutched her sketchbook. She did not respond, but the words carved deep wounds inside her. She returned to the mansion with her spirit heavy, only to find Richard waiting in the foyer. His sharp eyes scanned her face, noticing the way she avoided his gaze. "What happened?" he asked. "Nothing," she whispered, unwilling to reveal the cruelty she had endured. But Richard was not fooled. His jaw tightened, his voice low. "Do not let them define you, Clara. They do not matter." The intensity in his voice startled her. He sounded protective, almost fierce, and for the first time, she sensed that he cared not in the way of a husband in love, but in the way of a man unwilling to see someone crushed under a weight she did not deserve. That night, as Clara sat alone with her sketchbook, she thought of his words. She had married a man she barely knew, a man twice her age, a man who held her future in the palm of his hand. And yet, piece by piece, the ice around him seemed to crack. She wondered, almost against her will, what secrets lay hidden beneath Richard Whitmore's guarded heart. The fragile sense of calm that Clara had begun to build quickly shattered when the outside world forced its way into the mansion. Her mornings of sketching in the garden and evenings of quiet meals grew heavy with whispers that refused to die down. News of her marriage continued to feed the gossip columns, and her photograph seemed to surface in every paper she passed. One morning, as Clara entered the grand dining hall, she noticed two maids standing near the window, their voices hushed but urgent. "She looks so young beside him," one said. "It is a scandal waiting to explode," the other replied. "People say she married for money. They say she will not last until the end of the year." Clara froze, her hands tightening on the back of a chair. The words stung, not because they were new, but because they echoed the cruel accusations she heard in the city. Even within these gilded walls, she was still the outsider, the intruder. She took her seat in silence, determined not to show that their words had pierced her heart. Richard entered a few minutes later, his presence commanding instant silence from the staff. He glanced briefly at Clara, then at the untouched food before him. His expression betrayed nothing, but Clara noticed the tension in his jaw. It was as if he could hear the whispers, too, even if no one dared speak them in his presence. That evening, Clara found herself standing at the edge of the ballroom, where Richard was hosting a dinner for business associates. The men in their tailored suits raised their glasses, their wives dripping with diamonds as they exchanged sharp smiles. Clara felt their stares, their judgments cloaked in polite conversation. One of the guests, a woman with crimson lipstick and eyes like polished glass, leaned closer to her companion and whispered just loud enough for Clara to hear. "She is his charity project." Nothing more. Laughter followed, soft but merciless. Clara's cheeks burned, but before she could retreat, Richard appeared at her side. His hand rested briefly on her arm, firm and steady. He addressed the guests with a voice that cut through the room. "My wife is not a topic for your amusement," he said. The room fell silent, every gaze turning toward him. His eyes swept over the crowd with cold authority. "If you cannot respect her, you do not belong here." The woman with the crimson lipstick paled, lowering her gaze. Richard guided Clara away, his hand still on her arm. Once they were alone in the corridor, she whispered, "You did not have to do that." "Yes, I did," he replied, his tone sharp but carrying something deeper. "This house, this life, it is filled with people who would rather see you broken. Do not give them that satisfaction." Clara looked at him, searching his face. For a moment she saw not the ruthless millionaire, but a man weary of battles fought in silence. It unsettled her, stirring emotions she could not name. In the days that followed, the pressure mounted. Newspapers accused Richard of manipulating financial deals, painting him as a villain. Protesters gathered outside his office, shouting for justice. And in every story, Clara's name appeared as the fragile bride caught in a storm too large for her to control. One morning, a headline screamed across the front page, "The Bride Who Sold Her Soul." The article twisted her life into lies, portraying her as a schemer who had used marriage to climb out of poverty. Clara's hands trembled as she read it. She felt stripped bare, exposed to a world eager to condemn her. When Richard saw the paper, his reaction was not fury but a grim calm. He folded it neatly, set it aside, and said, "This is only the beginning." His words chilled her more than the article itself. That night, Clara lay awake, staring at the ceiling of her vast room. The chandeliers sparkled faintly in the moonlight, but to her, they looked like prison bars made of crystal. She realized she was not only fighting loneliness, but also the weight of public hatred, the suspicion of strangers, and the danger of secrets she did not yet understand. Still, something inside her refused to break. She pressed her sketchbook against her chest, whispering, "I will endure." Oh? But as she closed her eyes, the question returned, sharper than before. Why did Richard, a man who insisted their marriage was only a contract, protect her so fiercely in front of others? And what truths still lay hidden behind his guarded eyes? The storm outside the mansion walls grew fiercer with each passing day. Protesters filled the streets near Richard's office, their voices rising like a chorus of condemnation. Headlines screamed of corruption, of ruthless deals, of a millionaire who crushed his rivals without mercy. And alongside his name, Clara's face appeared again and again, painted as a symbol of greed and betrayal. At first, Clara wanted to hide. She wanted to close the heavy drapes, to lock herself away from the piercing eyes of the world. But the whispers in the corridors and the venom in the newspapers followed her even into silence. She could no longer escape the weight of it. One evening, as she walked through the marble hall, she found Richard standing by the tall windows, his silhouette framed against the city lights. He held a glass in one hand, his shoulders tense, his jaw set. Clara hesitated, then spoke softly. "Why do you not fight back?" Richard turned, his gaze steady. "Because sometimes silence speaks louder than denial. But there comes a time when silence can no longer protect what matters." Clara's heart quickened at his words. "And what is it that matters?" she asked. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he set the glass down and stepped closer. His voice dropped, firm yet quiet. "You matter, Clara. Whether you realize it or not, you are the weapon they aim at me, and I will not let them use you." The next day proved his words. Richard attended a public event, a charity gala that had been planned long before the scandal erupted. Cameras flashed as he stepped onto the stage, and Clara stood at his side, her pulse racing. She could feel the hostility in the air, the doubt, the disdain. When the questions came, sharp and biting, Richard did not flinch. A reporter demanded, "Is your marriage nothing more than a business arrangement? Is she just a pawn in your empire?" The room fell silent, waiting for his response. Richard's eyes swept the crowd, his voice steady and unyielding. "Clara Whitmore is not a pawn. She is my wife. She is a woman of strength, dignity, and integrity. And anyone who dares to suggest otherwise insults not only her, but me." Clara froze. She had expected deflection, maybe silence, but not this. His defense was not cold or calculated. It was raw, public, and final. The weight of his words pressed into her chest, stealing her breath. For the first time, he had claimed her not as a contract, but as something real. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Some were skeptical, but others nodded, their expressions softening. The narrative began to shift, if only slightly. Clara realized in that moment that Richard had chosen to put his reputation, his pride, and his empire on the line for her. Later, as the limousine carried them home, the silence between them was thick but not cold. Clara turned to him, her voice trembling. "Why did you say that? Why did you defend me like that, in front of everyone?" Richard looked out the window, his reflection dark against the city lights. "Because it was the truth," he said simply. Then he turned, meeting her eyes. "Do not forget, Clara. You are stronger than they know, but strength does not mean you must stand alone." His words lingered in her heart long after they returned to the mansion. That night, Clara opened her sketchbook again. her hand steady as she drew. Not roses, not sunsets, but Richard's face, the lines of his weariness, the steel in his eyes, and the fleeting softness she had begun to glimpse beneath the mask. For the first time since the wedding, Clara allowed herself to believe that this marriage might not be only a cage. Perhaps, hidden within its golden bars, there was a chance for something real, something fragile, something that could grow if she dared to nurture it. But even as hope stirred, a shadow of fear remained. For she knew that in a world built on power and secrets, love was the most dangerous truth of all. Clara's heart had only just begun to soften after Richard's public defense of her. But peace inside the Whitmore estate never lasted long. Beneath the marble halls and glittering chandeliers, tension coiled like a serpent waiting to strike. She could feel it in the clipped tones of the staff, in the restless footsteps echoing late at night, and in the way Richard disappeared for hours without explanation. One evening, as Clara walked past his study, she noticed the door slightly ajar. Inside, Richard sat at his desk, papers spread before him, his head bowed in his hands. His face, usually so composed, was carved with exhaustion. Clara lingered silently, but a sudden sound made her heart leap. "Time is running out," Richard muttered, his voice low, almost broken. "They cannot know the truth." Clara froze. What truth? She pressed herself against the wall, straining to hear. But Richard rose suddenly, gathering the papers into a locked drawer. His mask returned as quickly as it had slipped, and he walked past her in the corridor without noticing the fear in her eyes. That night, Clara could not sleep. She stared at the ceiling, her mind replaying his words again and again. Time is running out. What could he mean? What was he hiding? The following day brought no answers, only more questions. At breakfast, Richard was unusually quiet, his gaze distant. When Clara tried to speak, he deflected with curt replies. She felt the distance like a wall between them, thicker than ever before. And yet, she could not ignore the memory of his face in the study, haunted, vulnerable, human. Later that week, Clara ventured into the library and, on impulse, reached for the locked drawer in Richard's desk. She knew it was forbidden, that if he caught her, the fragile trust they were building might shatter. But curiosity burned hotter than fear. Her hands trembled as she found the hidden key left carelessly under a book. Inside the drawer, she discovered documents marked with seals of the hospital board, reports, test results, and letters bearing Richard's name. Her eyes widened as she read the words aloud in a whisper. Diagnosis: degenerative heart condition. Prognosis: uncertain. The paper slipped from her fingers. Richard was sick, gravely sick. Clara sank into the chair, her pulse racing. The pieces fell together the late nights, the weariness in his eyes, the urgency in his voice. The marriage contract, the cold walls, the distance, it was all tied to this truth. He had hidden his illness, perhaps believing that power and wealth could shield him from vulnerability. But why marry her? Why pull her into his secret world when he was fighting a battle against time itself? Tears blurred her vision, her heart aching with a mix of sorrow and anger. She felt betrayed, yet compassion surged alongside the pain. He had not only trapped her in a contract, he had trapped himself in a prison of silence. That evening, Clara confronted him. She waited in the dining hall, the papers laid before her. When Richard entered, his eyes immediately darkened. "You should not have touched those," he said, his voice sharp. Clara's voice trembled, but she stood her ground. "You are sick, Richard. You should have told me. Do you think I am so weak that I cannot bear the truth?" For a moment, his mask faltered. He looked away, his shoulders heavy. "This was never meant to be your burden," he murmured. "I did not want pity. I did not want you tied to a man with an expiration date." Clara's tears fell silently. "But you tied me to you anyway. Was this contract about saving your empire, or was it about saving yourself?" Richard's silence was answer enough. The truth lay bare between them now, sharp and painful. Clara's heart cracked under the weight of it. The man she had begun to see, not as a captor but as something more, had built their fragile bond on a foundation of secrecy. She turned away, her chest tight with grief. "I do not know if I can forgive you," she whispered. Richard's voice was low, almost pleading. "I never asked for your forgiveness, Clara. Only your strength. And now, I fear I have lost even that." The room fell into silence, broken only by the sound of Clara's footsteps as she walked away, leaving behind the man whose secrets had changed everything. The mansion felt colder after Clara learned the truth. The hallways that once carried faint whispers of hope now echoed only with silence. She avoided Richard whenever possible, her footsteps turning down alternate corridors, her meals taken in solitude. The distance between them stretched like an endless gulf, and though he did not chase her, Clara could feel his presence lingering at the edge of every room. Days blurred into one another. Clara buried herself in her sketchbook, filling page after page with restless strokes. Her drawings no longer carried the warmth of gardens and sunsets. Instead, they were dark, jagged lines that revealed the turmoil she could not speak aloud. The staff noticed the change, but no one dared to comment. Richard tried once to bridge the silence. One evening, he appeared in the library where Clara sat hunched over her sketchpad. His face was pale, the weight of his illness heavy on his shoulders. But his eyes searched hers with quiet desperation. "Clara," he said softly, "I did not want you to live in fear of what may come. I thought keeping my illness hidden would protect you." Clara's hand tightened on the pencil. She did not look up. "Protect me? Or protect yourself from admitting that you are human? You let me believe our marriage was only a contract, but all along, you were fighting something you could not control. Do you not see how that destroyed any trust we had?" His voice cracked, though he tried to steady it. "I did not know how to ask for help. I have lived my life carrying burdens alone. I did not think you would want to carry mine." Finally, Clara lifted her eyes. Pain and anger swirled inside her, but so did something deeper, a sorrow she could not shake. "You are right," she whispered. "I do not want to carry a lie. That is the burden I cannot bear." Richard's shoulders slumped. He turned away, leaving her alone once more. The sound of his retreating footsteps echoed like a final verdict. That night, Clara stood at her window, staring into the dark expanse of the garden. The roses she once sketched now seemed lifeless under the moonlight. For the first time since entering the Whitmore estate, she felt not only trapped but utterly invisible. And yet, beneath the sorrow, a fragile ember of determination burned. If Richard's secrets had fractured their bond, she would not let them break her spirit. She would stand on her own, even if that meant walking through the cold halls of this mansion without his hand in hers. The distance between them was vast, and Clara feared it might never close again. But in the quiet of her room, she whispered to herself, "I will not be consumed by his silence. I will find my own strength." What she did not know was that outside her door, Richard leaned against the wall, his hand pressed to his chest, his breath shallow. He had heard her whisper. And for the first time in his long life, the thought of losing someone, not wealth, not power, but her, left him feeling powerless. The silence inside the Whitmore estate could not hold forever. The outside world, relentless and cruel, soon forced its way back into Clara's life. Newspapers printed new accusations, claiming that Richard had manipulated funds meant for a city hospital project. Protesters shouted his name outside the mansion gates, their chants rising like thunder in the night. Clara tried to ignore it, but one morning she discovered a letter slipped under her door. It was unsigned, but the words were sharp as knives. "Leave him while you still can. His empire is built on lies. When he falls, you will fall with him." Her hands shook as she read it. She wanted to believe it was nothing more than another attempt to wound her, but fear gnawed at her heart. Were these just rumors, or was there truth hidden inside them? That evening, Richard summoned his lawyers to the study. Clara passed by and overheard fragments of their conversation. Words like embezzlement, evidence, and board investigation cut through the air. She stopped in her tracks, her chest tightening. This was more than gossip. Richard was in real danger. When the lawyers left, Clara stepped into the study. Richard sat in the shadows, his face grim, his illness more visible than ever in the hollows of his cheeks. For a moment, Clara almost turned away, but she forced herself forward. "You are being accused of stealing from the hospital," she said. Her voice was steady, though her heart pounded. "Is it true?" Richard lifted his eyes to hers. "No, but the board wants me out. They want my company, my influence, everything I built. If they cannot destroy me in business, they will try to brand me a criminal." Clara's breath caught. She could see the weight of truth in his eyes. Then fight, she urged. Do not let them take everything. Richard shook his head slowly. I can fight, Clara, but I cannot fight alone. They will drag you into this war. Use your name, your past, against us both. Clara's anger sparked. They already have. My face is in every paper, my name twisted into lies. If I am already in this battle, then let me choose where I stand. For a long moment, Richard said nothing. Then, with a weary sigh, he whispered, And where do you stand? Clara drew a breath, her resolve solidifying. With the truth, with justice. If you are innocent, I will stand beside you no matter what storm comes. His eyes softened, and for the first time in many weeks, Clara saw a flicker of light in him, a fragile hope. That night, as she lay awake, Clara realized that her choice had sealed her fate. She was no longer just the poor girl forced into a marriage she did not want. She was a woman stepping into the fire, ready to fight for more than survival. For justice, for dignity, and perhaps, though she dared not admit it yet, for love. Part 9. The True Union. The day of reckoning arrived sooner than Clara had expected. The board meeting was held in the grand hall of Whitmore Enterprises, reporters crowding outside, cameras flashing with ruthless hunger. Inside, the air was heavy with anticipation. Executives sat stiffly in their chairs, waiting for Richard to fall. Clara entered beside him, her chin lifted, though her heart pounded. She could feel the weight of every gaze, judging her, dismissing her. But she refused to shrink. Today, she would not be the frightened bride in borrowed diamonds. Today she would stand. Accusations flew across the room. A board member presented documents, claiming funds had been siphoned away. Murmurs spread like wildfire. The men and women around the table leaned forward, their eyes gleaming with triumph. Richard remained calm, his voice steady though his illness shadowed his features. The truth, he said, is that these accusations are built on forged evidence. And I can prove it. Gasps echoed when Clara stepped forward, placing her hands firmly on the table. She revealed a set of letters she had discovered while reviewing old files in the mansion. They showed the rival company's attempt to manipulate accounts and frame Richard for crimes he had not committed. Her voice rang clear. You sought to destroy him by using me as a weapon, by dragging my name through the mud. But today I say this, you will not win. Not against him, not against us. The room erupted in chaos, but the evidence was undeniable. Lawyers scrambled. Executives exchanged panicked glances. One by one, their accusations crumbled under the weight of truth. When the meeting adjourned, Richard and Clara stepped outside together. Reporters surged forward, shouting questions, but Richard raised his hand for silence. With Clara beside him, he declared, My wife has stood against every storm, every lie, every cruelty. If you wish to see strength, look at her. If you wish to see integrity, look at us together. This marriage began as a contract, but today it is something greater. It is real. Flashes burst from cameras, but Clara heard none of it. All she felt was his hand closing around hers, strong and steady. For the first time, he was not hiding behind distance or secrecy. He was choosing her, openly, without shame. Back at the mansion, the golden halls no longer felt like a prison. Clara walked beside Richard through the garden, where she once sat alone with her sketchbook. The roses glowed beneath the setting sun, their petals whispering promises of renewal. Richard paused, his breath uneven, his illness still present, but no longer a secret between them. Clara, he said softly, I cannot promise forever. But I can promise honesty. And I can promise that whatever time we have, I will choose you. Tears filled her eyes, but her smile was steady. She placed her hand over his. That is all I ever wanted. Not wealth, not titles, not contracts. Just the truth. Just you. In that moment, the marriage born of force and shadows became a union of choice and light. They stood together, no longer bound by papers, but by something far stronger. Love,